you've been reading the news, chances are the person who wrote the news you've been reading was just fired. The last few weeks have seen sweeping layoffs at BuzzFeed, HuffPost, TechCrunch, Yahoo, USA Today, and hundreds of local newspapers owned by Gannett. I would say it's a bad time for digital media, but that would imply that there was once a good time for digital media. So how do you get people to pay for journalism? PopUp Magazine has one successful, albeit niche, solution. PopUp Magazine, a podcast, documentary film, comedy show, play, and concert all wrapped up into one, presents nonfiction stories on stage in front of a live audience. The shows aren't recorded, so if you weren't lucky enough to snag a ticket, you missed it. In many ways, it's the antithesis of digital journalism. It can't be bookmarked for later, you can't consume it on your phone, and people are actually paying for it. To tell us more about how PopUp Magazine all comes together, we welcome back senior producer Aaron Edwards. Thanks so much for coming on to Woman 2BK.
Thanks for having me.
So PopUp Magazine, I've been to one, and it's a little bit of a hard concept to explain to somebody who hasn't seen it. So Can you try to do that?
Totally. PopUp Magazine is a live magazine created for a stage, a screen, and an audience. And we basically bring together some of our favorite writers, documentary filmmakers, photographers who present live stories that they've reported, that they've researched. So it kind of feels like a live reading. It feels like a podcast on stage. And all the stories are accompanied by original music by our live band. So when you go to the show, you're really in this immersive experience where you get to really feel the stories as opposed to just reading them or just listening to them.
And is it formatted like a normal magazine with like front of book, back of book, perfume samples?
Yeah, exactly. So depending on the show, every single show is different. So sometimes we might lead the show with something short that's like a front of book piece, and we'll have like meatier features toward the center of the show and wrap it up with something that you might find at the end of a magazine. So yeah, the cadence of the show sometimes follows that of a magazine.
And how do you go about, as an editor, selecting the pieces that are going to make up an issue at PopUp Magazine?
Yeah, so one of the things I really love about our team is that we come from a lot of diverse backgrounds. Some of us have been in magazines, some of us have hosted podcasts before, some of us have worked on websites. And so we all have this sort of story sensibility where we really look for the best stories that we can find. And we spend a lot of time just hunting for those stories. We talk to people we've worked with in the past. We take cold pitches as well. There's actually, a contributor guide on our site for folks if they want to pitch us. And then we look for stories that have a resonance, that are going to really pop in a theater, and that also stay true to narrative and to a lot of traditions of storytelling that really track well to our show. So we cast a really wide net and try to bring a lot of cool people into the fold.
And have these stories been presented or published elsewhere, or are they all original for PopUp?
All the stories that you'll see in PopUp Magazine in that iteration have never been seen before. So sometimes we might work with people who have done a project of some sort that maybe is in a certain stage, and they'll adapt it for our show before they release it. But most of the time, the stories you're seeing have never been heard before, so it's a really special thing.
And I know that you've only been with PopUp for 6 months, but can you give me an example of one of your favorite stories that you've worked on or that you've seen?
Yeah. It's so hard to choose, honestly, because I started seeing the show back in 2015 when they started doing a national tour, and I saw it in LA. And I guess there's one story that always sticks with me, and I think people have this kind of example as well, where there's one story that they just always think about. For me, it was actually Jenna Wortham did a story where there was live shadow puppetry that accompanied her piece. And it was a story about memory and technology, and it was just this incredible thing that I'd never seen anything like it before. So she was on stage talking about this guy, and it was a story about his memory loss and sort of his experience using technology to jolt his memory and to share his experiences with the world. And while she was telling the story, there was this incredible shadow puppetry that was being done on stage that sort of reenacted the piece as well. And I was just sitting there in my seat, just kind of in awe of it all. And that was the moment that I was like, okay, if I don't see this show every single year, I'm going to hopefully at some point get to work with them too.
I saw that issue too, and I think she closed out the show in the one that I saw, and the whole audience was wrapped, and it was these beautiful, I think Asian style, shadow puppets.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about that issue was that it really did feel like it was a one-night only thing, and what was happening in the theater was happening in the theater, and things went wrong. Like, there was also a magician, I think, in that issue.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
something didn't go right with his magic.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the technical term.
Well, it's the beauty and the excitement of live. Like, anything can happen, pretty
exactly.
much. Yeah.
And I loved that maybe that segment didn't actually go as it was supposed to go, and that the whole audience was sort of there on that ride together.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it was supposed to happen that way. So yeah.
So you mentioned Jenna's piece was about memory, and that's actually the theme of the winter issue. Is that right?
There are some stories, yeah. So we have a nice mix for the winter issue this time. We have like Francesca Mari, who's telling a really beautiful story about Alzheimer's and about treatment and some interesting experiments with that. I can't tell you too much about the story, but it's a really, really impactful and incredible story. James T. Green, who is a producer and artist, is doing a story about ringtones, which is something that is pretty indelible in people's memory, when we used to have custom ringtones. So he's going to do a really cool story about that.
What was your best custom ringtone?
Oh, man, I think I had Grown Woman by Beyonce at one point.
Very strong.
What about you?
I had, do you remember that weird video, Trololo? Where there was he was like a Russian singer from the 70s on some sort of like variety show, and the song was called Trololo. So
and that was your ringtone?
That was my ringtone.
Okay, cool.
Anyway, so when you are setting, say that it's like a written piece, when you are setting that to music or you're finding accompanying visuals, do the authors of the piece come to you with ideas, or as editors, is it your job to sort of matchmake with other visual elements and audio elements?
Yeah, it's a really collaborative effort, and I say that in the truest of terms. It's a situation where sometimes people are just writers. They're used to writing for magazines or used to writing for the web, and sometimes we have to make sure that we take their style and apply it to illustrations. We have an incredible art team that is amazing at just looking at a story and understanding how to visually represent it on stage. And then our house band, Magic Orchestra, will take that and then apply music to it. But it really comes from all parts of that story process. So the producer, the person doing the story, the artists, the musicians, we all talk about the look and feel and vibe of every story. So it can come from anywhere, and we really encourage that with folks that we work with.
So PopUp Magazine is doing really well. You guys regularly sell out your shows. Brooklyn is sold out, so unfortunately people can't go see it unless they have already gotten tickets. Why do you think it is that in sort of an era of the decline of traditional journalism that PopUp Magazine has managed to capture the imagination of so many people?
Yeah, I think before going into that, I should say that, a lot of the work that our colleagues do at places across the media spectrum are doing really meaningful and impactful and important work. So I think that what we're doing, even though it's a little bit different, doesn't necessarily set us completely apart from that tradition and from that work as well. So I still think that it's important to have a lot of different kinds of media hitting on different cylinders.
Absolutely, and it's not a replacement either, obviously.
Right.
You can't just go get your news once a quarter
in
a live environment.
And PopUp Magazine is not a like a news show traditionally. So if it was the only thing you saw every year, you wouldn't really be keeping up with the current events necessarily. But what our show brings, I think, at least for me as well, is that there's this really beautiful kind of unspoken contract that happens when you go to see a show live. When you're just sitting down, you turn your phone off, and you experience something that is really special for you and the people in the audience. I think that's something that is a really powerful draw. And the fact that, if you don't see the show, you miss it. And that's something that we really care about, is the feeling that you and the, couple hundred or 1,000 people who are in that room with you are experiencing something together that you can then talk about. I have friends who went to see that show with Jenna in 2015, and we still talk about those stories to this day. And that's a really nice shared experience that we're never going to replace with anything else. So I think that feeling is something that you can't quite replicate anywhere else. So it's really cool to see people have that experience and then share it and talk about it. After the show, we usually have an after party or a lobby drink situation where folks just can meet the contributors, they can meet us, the producers, and it really feels like a family. So
yeah, I'm having a hard time thinking of something else in our culture that you can't see after the fact, that if you weren't there, it's ephemeral and it's gone.
The closest thing to me is a play. I've grew up loving theater. I grew up hunched over my bed as a 8-year-old reading scripts all the time, and before I could actually go to see my own like first Broadway show or something like that. And I still always feel that way when I go to the theater every single time. And so even though our show has so many different elements beyond just theatrical elements, there's music, there's storytelling itself, there's so many pieces to it. It's still, whenever I go to see the show and whenever I'm backstage, I always feel like I'm, at a play. And that's a really cool feeling.
Do you have any dream contributors that you would love to work with on future issues?
Oh, man. Beyonce, if you're listening, if you'd like to tell a story at PopUp Magazine, we're available. No, I mean, the people who I am really interested in seeing in the show are performers. We work with a lot of writers who find that they have this performance gene in them that they haven't really discovered before, and that's a really cool thing to see someone get on stage and then just kind of knock it out of the park. Mm-hmm. And I'm so interested in bringing people who are used to doing that as well into the show and seeing how they might take a spin on our style.
Yeah. Do you ever have the experience of approaching, say, a writer who you love and saying, I would love for you to do a piece for PopUp, and then being like, oh, I could never, I'm more of a written word type person.
Yeah,
how do you coax them out of that shell and let them know that it's going to be okay?
I think that one of the things I love about our team is that the second that you start talking to, and I was in that same position where, I always kind of fancied myself as someone who was like a little bit more of like a performer and could do that kind of thing, but I was still nervous. I was talking to PopUp about doing a story myself, and the second I started talking to the team, I felt at ease. I just was like, these are people who are going to take care of me and the story that we're going to tell together. So that's really one of the biggest things that I think helps people feel comfortable is just when you can trust someone who's going to take your work and make it even greater than what it already is, then you can just kind of sit back and just be a part of the process. So I think that we find people, once they get on stage and do that first show, it feels so natural to them and they're just ready to do it. And then we coach them, we help them through the process, and then they're ready to do another show. I think one of the experiences we have is that people who do one show are just so excited to do more in the future. They're like, can I do more of them? Because it is a really special, cool feeling to get on stage and tell a truth about something that you've experienced or that you know. And people really rise to the occasion.
So we mentioned that the Brooklyn show is sold out, but where can people see PopUp Magazine?
Yeah, so if you go to popupmagazine.com, we still have tickets for our DC show and our Austin show, which are all both in February. So just head to the site and tell a friend. And then also we're going to have our spring issue for 2019 coming up in May. So if you go to the website and sign up with your email address, we'll let you know when those tickets go up for the first time. And people can jump on it early before we sell out, hopefully.
Great. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you so much.